Hello, religion thinkers. We may think we know what religion is, but we would really like to know what religion means. What is religion? Well, it's complicated. Why? Because, as I've described elsewhere, religion can become many things: superstitious, enlightened, dogmatic, fundamentalist, zealous, cultic, apocalyptic, realistic, and much else. Now compare religion to oxygen. Oxygen can become water, sulfuric acid, hydrogen peroxide, just air, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, ozone. It can rust and become complicated formulas here. The real-life complexity of things as small as atoms we should also expect to be reflected in something much larger: human belief systems like religion. In a prior video, What is Religion?, I defined religion like this. Religion is a belief in the divine or sacred which acts as a spiritual guide and moral compass. If you haven't seen that video, I'll put the link here and recommend you watch it. There, I admitted that this definition is ideal. That is what I would like religion to be, but I know that is not always what it is. Religion, like the atom of oxygen, can become many things. Oxygen has 2 free spots in the second valence, having only 6 of a possible full electrons there. That allows it to combine with many other things and form many different compounds. Religion varies like oxygen. It can become wise and enlightening or foolish and degrading, depending on how we view it and how it changes us. But look back at oxygen. You wouldn't call all the forms of it just one thing, would you? You would not call water sulfuric acid, hydrogen peroxide, carbon monoxide, ozone, or rust all by the simple label of air or oxygen. You don't need to be a chemist to know that this is misleading. But I would argue we don't have a good label or even a grasp on all the different things religion can become. Religion, in its various and contradictory forms, we often just call religion. But that seems a gross error and shortcoming of our language and understanding. Let me give you a few examples. I would argue, in its best form, religion that guides and offers wisdom and courage we should call religion, that which guides like a spiritual and moral compass, but it isn't always that, is it? And too often it is the opposite of that, and that we must explain. Religion that persists in belief, unfounded by evidence, and guided by emotion or imagination, I would call superstition. The belief that gods caused the thunder, the Aztec belief that sacrifice was necessary to make the world move, the belief in bad omens or portents without reason. These are all superstitions and things we might like to avoid. A belief that persists against reason and evidence is not a belief worth keeping. Then again, religion might make us wiser, like Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. The Bhagavad Gita calls the enlightened aspect of our soul the sattva quality of light and understanding. Enlightened persons in Hinduism have attained moksha, a spiritual unity with divine wisdom. In the Christian tradition, we might call them saints, or Sufi Muslims might venerate them as mystics. Religion can produce a wiser, more enlightened person. But it doesn't always do that, does it? Sometimes religious persons persist in making claims as if they were self-evident, irrefutable truths that any waking person with a brain must accept. We call these dogmas. A dogmatic person. But be careful here. Self-critical minds may uncover that it has its own unsuspected dogmas or beliefs which we just assume others must also share. So we have superstitious, unenlightened, and dogmatic persons, but what about biblical literalists? Those who assert that religion must be the way a particular text describes. We refer to these as fundamentalists, but that term was once just applied to Protestant Christianity, and it has taken on a more generic view of those with a dogmatic reliance on their own religious text. Now, a reasonable mind might be very suspicious of this high claim, but not rule it out. So if religion can produce enlightened good persons, which I argue it can also produce unenlightened, violent, and even terrifying persons. I would call these persons zealots after the first century figures of the era of Jesus Christ. These people wish to use violence to usher in a new era of religious freedom and independence from Rome. Remembering the days of the Maccabean revolt that issued some freedom from Greek control, zealots wished to use violence to restore their own order. The bloodlust of the Crusaders, the terrorism we saw on 9/11, or the violence of ISIS might seem to be filled with a kind of zealotry that is a blind zeal for an ideal and an unholy desire to use violence to accomplish its end. Zealotry might not be the best term to describe this religious view, but it's not wholly off the mark, perhaps, either. Cults are another form of religious belief. Cultists, we think of those as outside mainstream beliefs or traditions, those with separate ideas against the status quo. Academically, however, a cult can just refer to any religious group that has its own beliefs. Popularly, however, the cult has taken on very bad, radical connotations. We see them as led by charismatic, even crazed leaders who appeal to, manipulate, and dominate vulnerable persons. Honestly, every religion at its origins may have had some aspect of a cult, at least in the fact that it defined its very existence in protest of other religions. Jesus interpreted Judaism differently than other Jews, and we have Christianity that resulted ultimately. Muhammad rejected the polytheism of his time and brought us Islam. The Buddha rejected Hindu philosophy and created the ideals of Buddhism. Sikhs in the 15th and 16th century rejected the alternatives of Hinduism and Islam and created Sikhism. Cults or religions of any sort must be defined in opposition to and as an alternative to other beliefs that are perceived to be inadequate. That is a real reason why the idea of a universal view of religion, which is one a lot of people might agree with, is also wildly difficult. I champion the universal mindset, which looks for the common threads between us, but I recognize its inherently difficult and uneasy task. And what of apocalyptic thinking? The apocalypse, or the end of one world and the beginning of a new one, has been predicted in countless religions at many times. Some apocalyptic cults even result in the death or suicide of their own members, most infamously in the Jim Jones cult and the mass suicides of 909 people in Jonestown, Guyana on November 18, 1978. Now, 1900 years earlier, at the siege of Masada in Israel in the year 73, fully 960 Jewish rebels at the hill fortress were willing to commit suicide rather than be sacked by Rome. The religious cult at Masada could not bear to live in a world under further Roman occupation. Rather than submit, they took their own lives. Apocalyptic thinking involves a deep rejection of the way the world is, combined with an alternative hope of what it might become. Wishes and imagination are good, but when they take on a fervor and a zealotry independent from sound thinking, they produce very dangerous and even very gullible faiths. Now, I did my own dissertation trying to define the idea of religious realism, which would hopefully be a more sober-minded approach that rejects these extremes. This involved the study of Reinhold Niebuhr, a Christian realist who arguably saw love as a spirit of justice and good that should be realized in the world, but has many obstacles of sin and selfish politics that stand in its way. I do think a spirit of religious realism is really needed in the 21st century for this reason. Humans need belief systems to bind us together and give us a common moral and political direction. No religion or belief system will be perfect, but a religious realist tries to identify all the factors that might make belief unsound, untrue, or uncompelling and offer a better, more plausible alternative. A religious and moral view that is compelling and true to life is what a religious realist hopes to unveil, and that has been part of my own efforts because people can so strongly disagree. Finding this common spirit of realism in any religion or philosophy is extremely difficult and arguably, however, a necessary task. I could go on, but I think I've made my point. Just as we would not call rust, water, hydrogen peroxide, or ozone by any generic label oxygen, so we are misled about religion. When we say religion, we must remember it can become many things: superstition, enlightenment, dogma, fundamentalism, zealotry, cultism, apocalyptic thinking, and many other things. Or it can try to pursue and capture a religious realism, a spirit that mixes reason and emotion in a compelling and rational way. That's part of my goal. Religious realism is the best of religion's hopes of morality tempered by realism that does not dogmatically insist on their infallibility. Before I go, however, let me say one more word about why religion is so volatile. Just as oxygen has those 2 electron openings in its second valence, so religion lies at a vulnerable intersection of our minds. Religion lies at the center of at least 3 parts of our minds. First, the empirical intellect, which tries to rationally assess what is. When reason reaches its limit, however, it secondly meets imagination and the capacity of our minds to intuitively stretch beyond our limits. Thirdly, there is the emotional being, which taps into our inner desires. Survival instinct is a powerful one, and very likely a driving one in the imaginative wish that transcends our intellect, in the religious idea that we can survive death, and that our lives are inherently meaningful and purposeful. Where the empirical mind meets the emotions and the imagination, all sorts of things can be created. The most absurd are those that forsake the best qualities of reason, emotion, and imagination, and produce immoral, ungodly ideas. The most hopeful are where best reason, emotion, and imagination put us on a more hope-filled course and a more reasonable course. Religion is born deep in the fertile soil of our minds where reason meets heart and imagination. Not knowing if this world is all there is, nor having certainty that the world has a God or is godless, many choose the more personable and hopeful response that there is good in the world and perhaps also a God or something sacred. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, and please like and subscribe to this video and look forward to more videos.